I chose to be child-free and lost the one. Now I could get her back. I'm now 33M. Leah, fake name BTW, is 33F. I met her in our first year of university, and we dated into our mid-20s, moving in together along the way. The relationship was everything I could ever want, but eventually questions that don't really come up at age 18 start to matter, and we found ourselves at an impasse. She wanted kids, at some point. Not that very moment. I didn't, at all. Not just at that moment. We buried our heads in the sand for a couple years. I guess we were just hoping the other would change their mind until it got clear we wouldn't, and we called it quits. That pretty significant roadblock was basically the only thing holding us back from getting engaged right then and there, so when things ended, I didn't know what to do with myself. I got it. I didn't want to be the reason Leah wouldn't have something she clearly wanted, but it was rough. Over the next year, there were a few times when I was damn close to calling her to say I'd changed my mind, just to get her back. I'm not sure if I was planning to make do on that change of heart and be a father to kids I didn't really want, or if I would have just lied to her long enough to get my way. Both seemed pretty shitty, but anyway, thankfully, didn't get to that. But eventually I moved on, got back out there, and 8 years later I've had a handful of relationships, including a couple I'd say got serious, the latest of which ended around a year ago. I have nothing negative to say about the women I've dated, but it never clicked like it did with Leah, which I guess is why they eventually fizzled out around the 1-year mark. Back to Leah, we never technically burned bridges and even said we'd stay friends, but for most of the time that has passed since we broke up, we didn't make good on that. We were in contact occasionally, but far from frequently, and mostly kept it surface level, to the point that saying we were friends would be a significant stretch. That started to change last spring, as our infrequent chats slowly but surely turned into frequent hangouts. Of course, officially we were merely reconnecting as friends, but when two single 30-somethings with a lot of history are spending more and more time together while conspicuously not making much of an attempt to see other people, it shouldn't be a massive surprise that things may not remain completely platonic forever. It did take a while, though, but just last week one of us finally took a decisive step to change the status quo. We spent a bunch of time together over the holidays, hanging out at my place on Christmas and attending a New Year's Eve party together, as friends, of course. For example, I guess it's then that Leah got tired of me keeping the platonic pretense up and decided to take things in her own hands, and when we saw each other last week she came out and told me she wants us to be together again. She directly addressed the elephant in the room, the reason we broke up, and said she doesn't expect me to have changed my mind and is fine with that. She said she'd had a few pretty good relationships over the last years, but that she never quite felt like she did with me, and that reconnecting over the past year had confirmed to her that I still made her feel those things that others just don't. She said we don't have to jump right back into where we were all those years ago, and that she just wants to give us another try. She told me to think it over, and that's where I'm at. And feeling kind of lost. Because yes, in my immeasurable genius, and despite having realized months ago that my feelings for her had in fact returned, because of course they have, I opted to wait until now to give some thought as to what I'd do if she felt the same and brought it up. On the one hand, of course, I want to try again. But while Leah told me she's fine with my stance on having kids, she didn't outright say that she doesn't still want them. I probably should have asked right then, but immeasurable genius, you know. In my defense, I had a few things to process, okay? So are we trying again to once again kick that can down the road and hope the other changes their mind? I've also had a vasectomy, so yeah, I think I'd win that one. Or is she outright willing to give up on that for me? And if it's the latter, that's a pretty significant concession, and am I comfortable with the idea she might wake up in X years regretting her choice when it's actually too late? And then there's the fact that, okay, we can take things slow or fast or whatever, but if things went south again with us, it would be a pretty tough hit for me to tank, if the first time was any indication. And finally, yes, I know that if I want to actually get answers, I kinda just need to talk to Leah about all of this, which I already plan to when I next see her in a few days. And I should probably tell her about the vasectomy, either way. I'm not expecting Reddit to have all the answers to this, and mostly typed it out to help put my thoughts in order. OOPs for comments. Stock, past 4659. The having/not having kids part is rough, and each of you has to be absolutely certain in their stance on this. So this absolutely needs to be your priority, but to be honest at this point, I'd almost be more afraid that you two are in love with the idea of your past, the version from 8 years ago. It's a long time and a lot of growing and maturing has, hopefully, happened on both sides. Take your time to properly get to know today's version of each other. Winky face. OOP. That's fair. I do think I've seen enough of her in the past year to know that I'm very much into what she's become. Some of it familiar and some of it fresh. But it's true that we last were a couple ages ago, and the memory of that relationship definitely contributes to how I feel about her now, perhaps more than it should. But I think she realizes that, which is why she suggested we take it slow and not try to just hit resume. Side funny note on the passage of time, we actually watched most of the final season of Stranger Things together recently, and it was kind of a trip to think about how we started that show when we were a couple. It doesn't feel like those should be two things that belong in the same temporality, but I'm not sure which one my perception is warped on. Kelsey Statch. Bro, I didn't want kids and my GF did. I chose her. I wasn't about to lose the love of my life because I didn't want kids at the time, 20s, and she did. We have been married for 24 years and have 2 boys. I wouldn't change a thing. I have the woman I have loved every single day, and I have 2 terrific boys that are now in college. Sometimes you don't know until it happens. It's not always easy, but when you have someone that you know is 100% there to help pick you up when you fall, it makes things a lot easier. Stop wasting time. You two clearly love each other, and if kids happen, kids happen. You have each other, which in 30 to 40 years, you will realize was the best choice you could have made. OOP. I'm really happy things worked out for you, but I don't think I can quite approach it like you did. Not least of which because of the vasectomy, so kids won't just happen, and she needs to know that. But also because I tried to see it that way back then, before Leah and I broke up, but when we knew it was hovering over us if nothing budged. But I couldn't convince myself that I might change my mind then, and I haven't felt like I would since either. And I know, people have told me that they felt like that until they had kids, and it changed their POV, but purely personally, it's not something I've felt like I could roll the dice on. Miserable. Drive. 7896. It seems like she's just giving in. If I were you, I wouldn't go back to her. This problem will probably come up again at some point. And if you don't care anyway, and you do go back to her, I recommend you see a doctor to check that the vasectomy is still working. OOP. I've done vasectomy checkups before, but just one thing I'll say in case this was the implication, not sure it was, to be clear, if I had any thought she would ever attempt to or hope to baby trap me, I wouldn't be considering this with or without a working vasectomy. Entrepreneur_grouchy. I think 2 conversations might help. Why don't you want kids? Is it hereditary traits you don't want to pass down, financial issues, too much responsibility, etc.? What prompted her to change her mind? I always thought I would 100% want kids, but as I've gotten older, I've definitely been reconsidering things. So tread carefully, she may have changed her mind, but who's to say it'll stay that way? I think finding out why she doesn't want kids now will help you gauge that. OOP. So as for one, what I'll say is that it's quite personal beyond what I'm comfortable sharing with strangers, even under the cover of anonymity. It's not medical or financial, and while I do enjoy the freedom being child-free brings, it's also not the main reason. Last thing I'll say is that Leah does know why. As for 2, I definitely intend to discuss this with her, where she stands exactly and the why. Top comment. Sassy Siren 906. This is a catch. 22 if I've ever seen one. You want Leah, she wants you. But you also have to consider if she's genuinely okay not having kids, or if she's just compromising to be with you again. Proceed, but with caution. Open communication is your friend here. Update post. 4 days later. Back with an update. Backstory is on my profile for those who haven't read it. I'd already invited Leah to come over for dinner on Wednesday, prior to sending out the original post, which as the day came felt both far too soon and like I couldn't wait much longer. When Leah got to my place, I opted to have the big conversation right out of the gate, realizing it might spoil the evening, but really I don't think I'd have made for a very pleasant dinner partner with this rather pivotal conversation hanging over our heads. I started with the good stuff, telling Leah how much I loved that she was part of my life again and that I shared every feeling she voiced last time, that I never felt like I did with her, either then or now, with anyone else. But she'd correctly guessed that my position on having kids hadn't changed, that I had in fact had a vasectomy, and that if we were to try again, I would need to know that she's truly okay with this and isn't sacrificing something she might regret. That I'd love to give us another shot, but that she deserves to be happy and fulfilled, and that if I can't be the one to make that happen, the fact she hasn't found the right one yet doesn't mean she won't. Fun fact, Telling the woman you love that there might be another guy out there who'd make her happier than you could is not in fact fun. Leah replied that she thought I might say something along those lines, and that she'd been anything but rash in making that decision. She admitted that she'd always pictured herself having kids at some point, and it's not like she woke up one day and any such desire had just vanished, but that she once thought it'd be something she'd need by age 30 until she found herself past that arbitrary deadline, without kids and yet generally content with her life. That she's got a niece she loves very much and a nephew on the way, and that she'd been questioning if she truly needed kids of her own before she and I even reconnected, confessing that this evolving outlook was part of why she'd even allowed herself to get close to me again. She conceded that she didn't become opposed to the idea of having kids either, but that at this point she wouldn't call it a sacrifice, but rather just a choice, one that feels right to her. Now, I'm probably not the most objective person to say this, but I felt that this was a pretty damn convincing sales pitch. I did tell her that, as she'd suggested, taking things slow was most likely the right call, and that it entailed that I would understand if she re-examined that choice and only asked that she be open with me about it, but that in light of this I'd love to take her out on a date at the first opportunity if she would have me. She replied that she'd love that before poking fun at my framing of us going on a date being a new thing, as though we hadn't spent the past several months seeing each other regularly for one-on-one dinners and other similarly intimate settings, ongoing evening included, which I countered saying that I hoped by the end of said date she'd notice a marked difference between those times and this next one. Getting the big talk out of the way early thankfully turned out to be the right call, since its outcome was a positive one, and we had a lovely time together for the next few hours. Nothing too materially different from our recent hangouts so far, save for a bit of flirting, some gentle touches here and there, and a goodbye hug that lingered longer than usual. But it felt good to just be with Leah without having to pretend that my heart doesn't skip a beat every time she flashes me a smile. So right now I'm planning our first date and kind of sitting on cloud nine. There probably won't be another update anytime soon. I appreciate the feedback I got the first time, and we'll read what people have to say here as well, but I don't think writing a play-by-play of this new relationship would make for the best way to enjoy each step that may come. I will soft commit to an update at some point, but that's contingent on me remembering to do that too. Having stuff to share that I actually want to type out and put in the wild. And 3, I'll most likely show these to Leah eventually, and whether you guys ever hear from me again will also be up to her. One of OOP's comments. Specialist after 511, I don't buy this. Nieces and nephews aren't a placebo for your own children that you raise. She says this now, but it feels like she's trying to convince herself of this. OOP. I'll add that I'm summarizing a somewhat lengthy talk here. Rereading it, I get how what I've written makes it seem like she said, I have a niece, so I don't need kids, but it was more that she mentioned becoming an aunt and loving that experience, and during the same time period questioning her need for children of her own, with the two being tangentially related at most. But anyway, maybe she is trying to convince herself. I don't know everything, and certainly not the future. But I promised myself I'd hear her out, really listen to what she had to say, and at the very least she convinced me.